Yo, you're on. Hello.
Whoa, hey. Cheekface, Middle Spoon, album review. Hello one, hello all, it's the most independent ghost of them all, Casper in the flesh, and it's time for a review of Cheekface, Middle Spoon. Cheekface, independent band, super independent, and this is their 5th studio album, and when I say independent, I mean they really don't have a manager. They do not have a record label, and they're still killing it. They're still fucking killing it to this day with tours inside the country, outside the country. They're actually touring in Canada soon. But artistically, though, they have proven to be one of the most outstanding bands in the independent circuit right now, with proving it on It's Sorted, using their happiness and cheeriness in tone and tune as a veneer to the dismal reality that we live in. And if you've been watching my channel, they're certainly a band I've had my eye on for quite a while now. And honestly, I feel I should. I feel Fantano should. I feel other artists should. I think even Pitchfork talks about them, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Correct me in the comments. And I feel they should, because honestly, they're as great as a band as Cake was. They're almost as great a band as They Might Be Giants. And they actually use those influences, sure, but I feel they add more to it. And also Weird Al. I'm also getting Weird Al vibes on a lot of these tracks. And sonically, I would say there is a contrast here. I would say sonically, in comparison to It's Sorted, as dry as that mix was, which I loved the rawness of that and still being able to be very catchy, be very accessible. But with this one, they're definitely putting more meat on the bone here. I feel like the mixes are definitely more full here. And honestly, diving into more genres as well. Like, there's even a reggae track on here. There's quite a few reggae tracks on here. And they're still keeping up with the great grooves, still punchy. The bass lines are still precise. Chorus-wise, they provide a plethora of strength in that department. And even if a song I'm not too crazy about, I can give it its merit for its topical focus, and I can give it its merit for its hook game as well. And as I mentioned before, they take these outlandish, unignorable lyrics, and the contrast with the very... And as I mentioned before, in terms of ignorable contrast, we definitely got to talk about the lyrical contrast here. Taking humorous, outlandish lyrics and having them contrast with serious topics, and have these dancey, jovial tunes to back them up. And with these tunes, we are getting insanely catchy hooks. And also, I'd like to liken them in a way to Dead Kennedys. Probably not as insane or manic, but certainly more, I would say, in a topical sense, in a perspective sense, where they're writing lyrics from someone else's perspective, and the perspective of someone who they're criticizing, the person who is to be held accountable. And I feel they really get their point across here without sounding too preachy. And while they do have their musical influences, like I told you, like, even though I would compare them to Cake, they're certainly Cake fans, they're certainly They Might Be Giant fans, Weird Al fans, but they still hold an identity of their own, and I feel they're still continuing that on Middle Spoon. So in terms of changes here, I don't think anything's changed too radically. In fact, I think they're bringing something very refreshing this time around. I think they're bringing new ideas here, and still keeping within their identity, still keeping within the band's personality. And similar to System of a Down, I know I'm just rattling off a bunch of bands here, or at least it sounds like it, as long as there's a lot of problematic issues going on, whether it's racism, misinformation when it comes to health, as long as these psychos are in power, as long as there's injustice, I don't mean to sound corny, I don't mean to sound grim, but Cheekface will be there, because that's pretty much what they run on. I feel they run on problems with society and use that as the topic. They use that as the substance, but mix it with humor, mix it with some great playing, and that's pretty much how they get their point across. So while we live in a world majorly of peasant brains who kiss the boots of fascists, yes, Cheekface will be there. They will be there to make fun of them. They will be there to speak from the perspective of them, but not share their views, but make fun of their views. And especially with the economy being in the shitter, which they definitely touch on as well. So I feel as long as we have these issues, Cheekface will have plenty of ammo to work with. Or someone who feels appalled for having to hold accountability, like on Gross Sucks. With lines like, "Gross sucks, it makes you worse, you gotta stay close to the one you were. But if we used to be friends, and you're still sick of my shit, well, I've done a lot of work on myself, you'd be surprised, you might like it. So why not let me be your soy boy? I'm getting kind of desperate." Yeah, definitely showing a satirical view of different perspectives, and I'm loving that. Or even the opener, "Living Lo-Fi," that's very punchy, very power pop to the max, very peppy, but still using this as a veneer to show you how in disarray and dystopian this society has become, as this is our dystopian observation of the apocalypse in terms of the economy that we're living in right now, while society is struggling economically due to the circumstances we're in. Asking the audience or the listener, are you living lo-fi? Are you living in the mess you made? Are you saving money, crashing at practice space? Are you saving cigarette butts out of stale ashtrays? And as the second chorus gets in, we get to the heart of the issue, as in getting zero to no assistance from the welfare state, especially with Trump and Elon and his Doge goons just wreaking havoc, hacking into Social Security, cutting programs that people need to survive. But yeah, totally unrelated sonically. But again, I think Dead Kennedys really come to mind in terms of the perspective, in terms of speaking on economic circumstance, but adding humor to it. Very Dead Kennedys. But also the sonic goofiness of Weird Al. And the whole thing is sounding kind of like a PSA maybe, a commercial, an advertisement, but very self-aware advertisement. Like, this thing is asking you these questions, like it's trying to sell you something, but I feel like it's more of the idea that it's pitching disguised as an advertisement, and that's pretty much the premise that it's going for. Like, it's weird, it's cheeky, but it definitely works. And while not unhinged sonically as the Dead Kennedys, I feel they still get their point across similar to them. But yeah, I feel this is a very socially aware state of the economy right now. A very socially aware state of the economy banger. But ultimately, very radio friendly without even selling out. I mean, there is a music video for this thing, and honestly, this could be like their breakout moment. And with a message like this important, it damn well should be. So, simultaneously showing how shit and in dire straits we are as a country, while giving oligarchy a good kick in the balls with a smile. And there's Flies, which definitely has a hand from one of my favorites in punk rock, Jeff Rosenstock, on here. But unfortunately though, I do think this is part of the underwhelming turn of the album, at least in the beginning, which I feel does flirt with the idea of reggae, but not exactly going all in. With some great semi-tropical guitar hits, descending melodies that sound like sighing, and some poignant, memorable lines, even though the vocals are a little bit low-key here. And after this, we get The Wind Is Gone, which is honestly the most ill-conceived song I think Cheekface has ever done. I'm sorry, but that's what it sounds like. For one thing, you have these pounding, grating, beeping dial tones going which is so obnoxious, continually grating, and I feel like the viola was a nice touch, but it's way too faint in the background. And then the track breaks into this hideous harmonica section that sounds like an out-of-practice Bob Dylan or Neutral Milk Hotel. And I know they're pretty raw, but this one just needed another redo. Oh man, it's one of their most unflattering moments here. I gotta say that. And as long as I'm complaining, I should also discuss the last leg of the album as well. I know it's gonna happen, not exactly a terrible cut, but not exactly one that really sticks with me, and is honestly way too short. But don't get me wrong, I do like the string additions to the track, but I do like some of the beaming synths, I do like the bass, and I do like the elegant strings on the hook. With the lyrics and vocals being pretty deadpan, lyrically giving you a very bleak, dismal, I guess, prediction on the future, not exactly promising, and really showing the acceptance of pessimism with lyrics like, being dead is simple, but grief leaks into life, the E's for entertainment, the H is for Jesus Christ. And Hard Mode really comes off as somewhat a 80s power pop track with a very semi-Julian Casablancas vocal here, maybe mixed with a little cake, with some very formulaic structures, and doing these baritone soars, which I think are fine, but the blaring guitars at the end, the blaring guitar line is just way too fried, way too compressed. And the way the track is set up, it's pretty predictable, but I do enjoy the satire of this track. I don't think the tune is bad at its core, but honestly, I think there's a little more of cliche here than I would have asked for. But there are some comedic lyrical gems here that I gotta touch on. A little friendly competition is healthy as long as I win. But other tracks here are definitely highlights for me, such as Rude World, which has some nice modern white guy reggae, and I'm a proponent of white guy reggae as long as it's done tastefully. Of course, I love The Police, I love The Clash, I love Choking Victim. There's a few others to name too. I would say The Specials as well, even though it's not an all-white band, but you know what I mean. But this thing's got some groovy organs that are very bright, lyrically hitting with necessary commentary on environmentalism, addressing the mentality of society, wacky online theories, but of course pushing back on fraudulent and false information around these topics, and also touching on people making desperate survival tactics in order to survive, corruption with our healthcare system, observations of people saying they're not going to contribute to the cause, they're not going to contribute to help, they're not going to contribute to put anyone in power to help. I feel Cheekface does a great job on shedding light on these topics as we're being misled with current continuous jargon. And I feel, again, Cheekface does a great contrast of satire, but also raising awareness to the rude world that we're living in, and doing it in a very lighthearted and very catchy tone. And I feel raising awareness to a rude world that we're living in with humor and lightheartedness in terms of the sonic elements. With lyrics like, running to the bus, 2 drinks in a tote, online influencer says he's not gonna vote. Honestly, I just love the observational sequence here. Like, I think it just ends perfectly thematically. And Military Gum, which is probably the most rockin', heaviest track on here, with a killer rap verse from McKinley Dixon that has like these linear synth harmonies, and as he's rapping, it definitely does kind of remind me of Cake's Going the Distance, that has these blaring, projecting, hard rock vocals, and the distortion on Greg's vocals here really do add to the track, as Cheekface is satirizing the bootlicking views of these tankies, taking shots at the military-industrial complex, and it all comes off very cheeky and definitely does stick the landing. Meanwhile, Art House shares a similar sentiment, and I feel they're going back and forth with the dialogue here as they're sharing perspective of one individual, they're sharing perspective of the individual trying to talk sense into this person, trying to understand this person, loaded with very witty and comedic similes. I feel we're getting the perspective of this person who is just this confined, dumb fuck conservative incel, and very hard to read, very hard to understand, and this person is trying to talk to them, and this other person is trying to stay in their echo chamber, trying to just stick to what they know. Like, I feel there's a lot of call and response here, where the person who's trying to have this person touch grass is basically saying like how out of touch this person is, asking if he knows that Tame Impala is just one guy, and comparing the lost in translation aspect to an indie movie like hard to follow, like only turning you on when I want to get confused, but also has a very romantic veneer to it. And I love the peppy power pop sitcom theme this has sonically. It definitely does sound like a 90s sitcom in a way. And then there's Gross Sucks, which in terms of the commentary plays like a similar sentiment. Musically, a very deadpan but also humorous track here that goes into more bluesy psych rock territory. And the whole thing kind of comes off as the Doors if Jim Morrison had a sense of humor. And I love the abrupt, shouted, distorted vocals, like the call and response vocals going, yeah! And we also get like these vicious crash sounds. And it's a satirical view on this absolute unyielding moron who can't take accountability and putting on this victim complex to change, to be a better person, saying how it's so detrimental to change, how evolution is pretty much bullshit and they should have just stayed who they were. It actually makes them worse. Really a coping style track put into the perspective of someone who's toxic, manipulative, gaslighting, can't take accountability, and how being a thoughtful, understanding human being is so tragic, so bad. And I'm sure we all know plenty of people like this. We also have more elements of reggae on the song Don't Dream, which pretty much is put in the mindset of really making the action speak in opposed to words, like saying, I don't have dreams, I have goals, I accomplished these, let's do this, let's do that. Each sequenced perfectly, like definitely a ska track here with some bright trumpets, a nice trombone section, which is played by the excellent and multi-talented musician, singer, songwriter, Jer, who's a fantastic ska and reggae artist you should definitely check out. They are amazing. And what I also find captivating is the roaring guitars coalescing with the ska instrumentation. And we got another power pop post-punk track, Content Baby, which I feel is the last highlight for me personally, which is certainly a track that's gonna go down as a power pop post-punk banger, definitely a gem in the catalog of Cheekface. And honestly, should have been a single. It's catchy like a single. It's a banger like a single. I don't know why they didn't put it as one, but still a great track. As ultimately, this is pretty much the normalization of conforming here, how you're pretty much just putting your dignity on the line. You're pretty much giving your consent to sell out, to just trade in who you were. Like there's a huge desperation factor here, just trashing your authenticity for acceptance. And it's very punchy, it's exciting, but also romantic coded too, as a Cheekface track would be, except this time very different. And I love that. I do love how they've taken humor and contrast, but also pretty much a coding, like giving you a coding of a romantic track when really it's not a romantic track at all. And again, I feel they're very good at personifying and putting humor on a serious topic in, again, a very catchy, fun way. And honestly, as they're sharing these criticisms and with how hard-hitting this track is, how great this track is, this should have been the last track. It would have been the perfect track to end the album. But honestly, overall, I think this is a solid release. Maybe not one of my favorites of the Cheekface catalog. Like, do I like it better than It's Sorted? No. Do I like it as much as Too Much to Ask For? No. I still think this is a good record, though. I still think this is a decent record. I think it's certainly more satirical than the previous release. I think it definitely shares different perspectives from the previous release. And still keeping their silliness, still keeping their goofiness, and touching on topics that have poignancy with their humorous veneer that I've loved for a very long time. I think their pen game is still great. And as I said earlier, certainly more full in production, definitely less dry than It's Sorted, even though I love that record. And certainly has more meat on the bones here. And really an album I think rock fans and Cheekface fans in general could really appreciate. And I could certainly tell more went into this. I could certainly tell more of a budget went into this. And given the features here, this is definitely a unifying album. This is definitely the unifying independent album. And honestly, even though I wasn't crazy about some collaborations here, some additions here, I still think this is a good record because even though I wasn't head over heels for it, I still think the layering's nice, good hook game. I think the instrumentation of new genres, sharing of new genres here, diving into new genres here is great. And also some of my favorite Cheekface tracks, some of my favorite Cheekface songs land on this record. So even though I don't think this is a bad one by any means, I still think they're digging into issues of poignancy and still keeping it fun and cheerful in tone, creating a great contrast. And I think they're doing it really intricately with new ideas. I'm feeling a 3.5 out of 5 on this album. If you've given this a listen, what did you think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? That's it. Caspa got the ghost. Cheekface. Middle spoon. Till we meet again.